Hi, everybody. Just trying to get things started here for our Ask Vanessa Anything, hopefully on Facebook and YouTube, and also definitely here in the room on Zoom. So if you have the chance to hop on over, you can look in the description of the live, and there's a link to join us on Zoom. We'd love to have you. Well, as we're getting started, I just wanted to acknowledge that, we made it through the first month of the year. Well done, everybody. It's like a big feat sometimes to just get through every day, much less a whole month. So this year has also been kind of off to an extraordinary start for many different reasons, for many different families. And I just want to acknowledge that and tell you that I see you. And I've been hearing from the families that I work with closely, as well as friends in my community, that we have a lot on our minds this time of year. We're trying to kind of start on a fresh page and get some things in motion. Maybe we're starting to look at what camps at school, changes are coming up for the fall. People are in the middle of some pretty big decisions and applications. Or maybe we're able to savor the slowdown of winter. Some of us are kind of contemplating the balance between focusing on our families and helping out our neighbors and the community at large. And there's a lot pulling us in a lot of different directions. And I just want to acknowledge that you're not alone and that you're in good company. There are a lot of really big-hearted families also trying to do their best to balance things and to stay engaged, stay involved, while taking care of their little ones, their big ones, their in-betweens. So today, as we kick off Ask Vanessa Anything, I just wanted to make sure that each and every one of you knows where my heart is, which is with you and with all the families making it work in these times. Part of why I focus on families is because I do believe there are a lot of good people doing really good work in the education space in schools, working to provide things for kids and teachers, and that's a whole other kind of battle that's being fought right now, and often cases winning, sometimes struggling, and I commend that. And let's keep working there to improve things for kids and teachers. I do know, though, that families often are sort of left out of that picture because, these organizations and institutions, these schools are really focusing on trying to just make sure that basic programming is continuing, that enrichment opportunities are there, that childcare is provided after school, that teachers have training, teachers have supplies in their rooms, and have opportunities for professional development. And that's all important. But who often gets left out? The parents. And it doesn't make sense to me. It never has made sense to me that the folks who are actually the most responsible for the kids will have the highest impact for the kids, on the kids' lives, and will be there for all of the years, don't have more support and training beyond just what to expect when you're expecting and how to care for an infant. But getting into things like emotional mastery, motivation mastery, conflict resolution and repair, how to set up healthy boundaries, how to set limits that stick, how to, navigate daily routines and create more independence and responsibility in our kids regarding their routines. So I'm here for that piece. That's part of why I've committed my career now in the later years here to helping families. And one of the ways I do that is I do this Ask Vanessa Anything segment. So here we go. Our very first question is from Eszter. Eszter says, how can I handle differences in parenting styles between myself and my daughter's dad? All right. Well, first of all, I just want to acknowledge how painful it can be to be on a different page from your other primary caregiver of your kids. And it sounds like it's mostly parenting styles, which you didn't say it's a disaster. So there is some common ground. Maybe you have, for example, common goals or a common vision for where you would like your kids to end up and what kinds of relationships you'd like to have. But perhaps the sort of vehicle or the habits or the style that you approach it is not aligning. Well, one of the first things I would say is, consider doing like an inventory, something like my parenting strengths quiz. I was just talking to a family today about how, we can actually, if we go to the same sort of process of thinking through what we're doing and what we want, that often helps to bring us on the same page and get us some clarity. It's also part of why I love doing parenting styles inventories for my clients whenever possible, where we kind of look at, okay, how were we raised, right? And these are conversations you can have unguided without a mentor too. How were we raised? What was that like? What was my mom, my dad, my caregiver like at their best? What were they like at their worst? What do I want to emulate, and what do I want to leave behind with the older generation? And then just having that conversation and being without jumping in to correct each other, but just listening openly, which is something that I like to facilitate, right? Like we have this, I set the stage, there's a framework, we talk it through, people have their turns to like share, and the other one's observing, and then we kind of bring it together and identify some goals. What you often find is that there are like 1, 2, or 3 kind of cruxes to focus on that will help you bring you to greater alignment. One of them, the most common one, which I'll mention now, is how we discipline the kids. And the word discipline alone can even mean wildly different things to different people. But coming up, like actually walking through, and I love hand-holding parents through this, walking through specific scenarios and how are we going to handle it? How are you going to handle it when when our daughter ignores a request? How are we going to handle it when our daughter says no and refuses to do something? How are we going to handle it when our child crosses a boundary, like throwing something that's breakable, or screaming at a person, or using physical hands and feet to express her displeasure or her anger? How are we going to handle it when we only have 10 minutes left and we're only halfway through the routine? That's one of the big, what a lot of people call pressure points, or kind of sticking points. How are we going to handle it when, right? And walking through those scenarios. And sometimes it can be really illuminating, because you'll start to hear a pattern maybe of like, well, I would respond this way and you would respond that way. And then sometimes you do get to a place where you're like, you know what? We're kind of stuck in a pattern. We're stuck in our ways, and we really need to kind of take a step back, and either with a mentor in a program like mine, or on our own, like reconsider what our options are and make sure we're choosing intentionally. And the reason I emphasize choosing intentionally is that often what happens is we put our best foot forward, but then when rubber hits the road, something is starting to feel stressful, time pressured, triggering in any way, we'll default to the pattern. And that's where we kind of get stuck in this kind of crux, right? Where we're not really aligning. The other thing you can do is work on projects together, build a routine together, practice limit setting together, practice conflict resolution skills together. These are things that all my clients do when they work with me, because what ends up happening too is you start to build that sense of teamwork around just like the practical, on the ground, hands-on strategies that you're using towards goals. And as you start to have little breakthroughs of progress, it helps to build a lot more momentum, and also like goodwill between two parents who might be coming from different styles or approaches. Last but not least, do an inventory with someone like me. Go through the framework, find out where you each land, where your caregivers land, take a really good look at it. This is something like I said, I like to do with my clients when I can. And it's also I like to kick off my year-long program for folks who join the program on the early side, which there's an opportunity to do. If folks are interested, hop on my calendar and we can get you a complimentary session and chat through what that would look like to have a parenting styles inventory as a part of your support plan. Link is in the description of this video, and of how to hop on my calendar. We'll want to talk this week because this cohort closes very soon, and for you to get in on the earlier side to get that parenting styles inventory. Eszter, if that's of interest to you, I would love to see you hopping on my calendar, and anyone else that this speaks to. All right, next question. Why do certain boundaries and limits seem to not work, and how can I set them more effectively? Oh, I love this. Okay, so I have a couple of different thoughts on this. First, I just want to kind of tap into my experience in the classroom. So if a limit or boundary was not working in my classroom, I wouldn't just know 1 or 2 or 3 ways. I would know times 24 kids, right? So the feedback was very strong and very clear very quickly. But even then, sometimes we would find ourselves just playing whack-a-mole and not really paying attention to like the emerging trends. So this is for Nikeema, Francis, and Izzy. Why do certain boundaries and limits seem not to work, and how can I set them more effectively? Here's what I want you to know about limits and boundaries and routine and these kinds of routines of how we meet those expectations. They are teachable skills, and kids need us to take time to train them on those skills and to make crystal clear what happens when they do meet those expectations and what happens when they don't, and even involve them in the process by doing things like having them role play it out, having them imagine the two outcomes, having them even have some input on what happens in each scenario. The other thing that we can do is build in some support for them, knowing that in a process I call it scaffolding, that a lot of people have heard in my world, where you break things into smaller steps and say, first of all, maybe try it out with, someone who has some child development experience. Is this expectation age appropriate to begin with? If it is, you kind of get very descriptive and very real about where your child is now, your child, teen, or tween, and then say, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to be. How do we break this down into smaller, specific, measurable goals? So let's say it's happening, this behavior that's, out of bounds is happening every day. Can we work on getting it to three times a week, and then once a week, and then once a month, and then it's resolved? That's one way we can think of scaffolding, is frequency. Another thing we can think of is intensity. So right now, when, let's say there's two siblings, when one sister gets mad at the other sister, they do something physical to their body, right? They pull their hair, they scratch them, something like, they grab them, hit them, something like that. And that's where we are. And where we want to be is that they're, solving their problems with their words and even being kind and thoughtful with each other. Well, in order to, you can't just go from you're scratching each other to be nice. That's just too big of a leap, right? Especially for their emotional reality of like whatever's the driver behind the behavior. I always think like, what's the need behind the behavior? And all behavior is communication. I'll say it again. What is the need behind the behavior? I just think of like pulling the curtain and like being curious, like what's behind this, and then the other is like, what if all behavior is communication, what's the message that's trying to get across with the scratching or the hair pulling or the grabbing, right? It could be, I'm mad that you keep touching my stuff, even though I asked you to stop. That's a very common one. But they're not finding the words, so they're grabbing instead. So one thing we're going to do is like, eventually we'd like them to take a breath and go, can you please stop touching my stuff? Or I'm going to need to, get some help from mom, and that's like a very straightforward, firm thing, But right now, maybe they need to huff, get up, and stomp away until they can calm down and either try again or get some help, right? Like they're not able to say calmly and collectively, oh, shoot, it's not working. My words aren't working. You're not listening. I need to get help now. Do I need to get help now, or can you listen, right? They're not able to do that yet. So we'll take, but before we'll push them there, we'll just take this first incremental bit of progress, right? Going from being physical to stomping away and cooling down, even if they have to stomp and yell while they're doing it. Hey, we'll take it, right? And then you kind of stair step it up into the behavior you want. So when I think of effective limit setting, scaffolding and teaching and working on skills and supporting them along the way is really like where it's at. The other piece that I like introduced to my clients first, because we spent 2 months of the year on this in my year-long program, is we always want to make sure we know what the rules are, what the expectations are, why they exist, and like I said, what happens if they're followed or not followed. A lot of times we know what the rules are, but we don't know the other parts very well. Like we can't articulate why. And so I love going through, it's another kind of inventory. I love going through what are our sort of, red zone behaviors that are absolutely out of bounds, where we would like, think of a red stoplight. It's like, we would say, oh, stop, right? And why? And then moving from there to like, what are the yellow zone behaviors, like things that sometimes are okay in certain circumstances and sometimes not, and why? And then don't forget the green zone behaviors, describing the things that you do want. like my example, right? We would like you to use your words and ask firmly but clearly for the child, for your sibling to stop or go. That's like the green zone. That's like the thing we want the kid to do. We'd say green light, good job. We love that. Breaking it down. So I've had families use this tool with me. I have like a template for it where they fill out the red, yellow, and green zones, and then they are on the same page. And by the way, this goes back to Esther's questions. They are on the same page of what the expectations are, what's considered not okay, what's considered sometimes okay, and what's considered always okay. So all of these pieces kind of come together where you have clarity, you know how to sort of frame the choices and the follow through with the limits, and you know how to scaffold. All of these things add up to really effective limit setting. I used to suck at this. I used to be very, very bad at this because I didn't really have a good model growing up on like, how does one set boundaries and follow through in a way that's instructive, that's constructive, that's emotionally grounded and supported. It was a lot more charged and a lot more kind of like get on board or else, which is understandable considering the background of my caregivers, but definitely didn't help me to know how to handle when kids were misbehaving every single day, every hour of the day, because things come up all the time that are out of bounds because kids are still learning the boundaries, right, and expectations. So this is a framework I had to develop for myself, and now I love to teach others. Next question. So this is from Fred. I love this question. Fred says, how can we figure out what's behind our 4.5-year-old's behavior challenges at school and support them effectively? So Fred, I know that you've updated me since that some of this has improved because you actually went to a different school. And I'm so happy about that for you and your family that, you found, and it sounds like you have last I heard, like it's a better fit for your child. What I want to say about this though, is that sometimes we're not able to leave, like we're in a contract. It's the school in our district that we're assigned to. It's the only school in town. I've had a couple of families in small towns say like, well, this is the only option besides homeschooling. And some of them did homeschool, but others say we got to stick it out and work it out. So if you're in the stick it out and work it out category of figuring out behavior challenges for young kids at school, the first thing I would do, and this is something I've done for families before, is I would request it to do an observation. And if there's a way that you can do it through an actual like observation window where your child can't see you, that's better. But even if not, if you can at least, be somewhere in a corner and just kind of try to ignore what's going on, see if your child can ignore you a little bit. Maybe you have look like you're busy, and then get a sense of like what the dynamic is between your child, the other children, the environment, and the adults. I'll say it again, between your child, the other children, the environment, and the adults. Usually one of those three things will stand out as not really working very well. And when I say the environment, though, that's even things like not just where things are placed around the room or like if there's enough, I don't know, clipboards for every kid that wants one, stuff like that. But also like the routine, the schedule is part of the environment. So it's like the physical environment and sort of the temporal environment of like the timing of things. And then the interactions with the adults is the other thing I'd want you to keep an eye on. Like, are they at your child's level? Do they seem to have affection towards your child, or at least like a decent sense of like knowing them and treating them as an individual? Are they like tapped into what's intrinsically motivating to them and what soothes them? I think motivation and emotions is very key to caregiving at this young age, and really any age, even adults. But like, are they attuning to your child in these ways? Do they seem to like understand like what kind of grounds your child into an activity, right? Like hooks them in. Like I had this one child that I observed, and man, did she really like the idea of being able to take off her shoes, and then her and her friend take turns like tracing each other's bodies. And it was so clear that like the little like getting the shoes on and off, this is a 4-year-old, getting the shoes on and off and like having to like change the levels and like lay down and get back up and color and use her whole like gross motor, mid motor was great for her. And her teacher had really good instincts about that and directed her towards that activity. Once she had that satisfaction of mid and gross motor, she then was able to do a fine motor exercise that required more seated concentration, that much better than she was able to before that. So these kinds of things we want to see from caregivers, like being able to tap into what works best for that, for your particular child. If you're not seeing that, then that could be a flag of something that could be addressed and worked on. And also, I would say from here, we're thinking about the environment and the other children and especially the caregivers as, elements of a greater whole, and like that we are like partnering with the people in charge as a team to meet your child's needs so that they can learn and grow and feel safe and secure at school. Because if any of these things are not happening, they're too bored, or they're overstimulated or understimulated in terms of like the level of challenge and the level, level of stimulation, or they don't feel safe for some reason because they feel worried about getting in trouble, or there's a kid who's not in control of their body and keeps bumping into them, something like that. Their stuff keeps getting taken and missing. That safety part, and the security of like a securely attached bond with at least one caregiver. When those pieces aren't in play, children's behavior can go really sideways. Okay. And then the last piece I would be looking at is, how does my child's behavior compare to all the other children in the room? Because one of the things that these observations can really do is help us see like how our kids are a standout in any way. Are they more physically active? Are they louder? Are they more demanding? Or maybe less of all of those things? Are they, touching everything? Are they, things that stand out to you? Keep an eye out for that. So that would be my very first thing. This observation can be so powerful. And if you can't do it, you can have a professional do it. Someone like me, like a parenting coach or a learning specialist, or occupational therapist. A lot of us will do school observations. I've done several, and they're very illuminating, and I really enjoy them because of how much we can learn from them. And then from there, hopefully you'll see receptivity from the teacher and or administrators in working out a behavior plan. That's the next thing. It's like, so I don't like starting with a behavior plan. I like ending with a behavior plan. The behavior plan is the goal of all of this information gathering, and hopefully even the administrator has observed your child. So we all have a sense of what we're talking about. It's nothing secondhand or only incidental. We have it in the context of like a good hour and a half or 2 hours of time in the classroom. So just so you know, it can be robust and it can be like a lot, but it's also where the magic can happen. Because from there, you can identify things that are like potentially accommodations, additional needs. You can see which like kid dynamics might need a lot more support, either in building up or sort of, simmering down. You can see if there's like an incompatibility between caregiver and child temperaments, which happens sometimes. And then if that's very glaringly obvious, you can do things like request transfer to a different classroom. So lots of different ways that this can be wildly helpful. So anybody who's out there looking at school transfer, like I feel for you. I know how difficult it can be to be in your position. And if you're not able to transfer, or you want to try and give it another go in your current environment, this question was for you. So next, we have a question from Christie, Moumita, and Nora. They all wanted to know more about emotional mastery. So, for example, my child seems to be often overwhelmed by their feelings. How many of you also have a kid who has big feelings, a deeply feeling kid, as Dr. Becky would say, big emotions. Maybe they tantrumed a lot, or tantrumed and melted down intensely. So I think of like frequency, duration, and intensity. So maybe it's happening a lot. They last a long time, and they're really intense, these episodes. And it doesn't always have to be like the big Tasmanian devil tantrum, of like thrashing. It could be running away and running. It can be withdrawing and shutting down. It can be it can look a lot of different ways. And actually, there's a really great session that my colleague and I do mostly led by my colleague who's an occupational therapist in my program at our emotional mastery weekend, just in this, like trying to identify like, what is my kid's like meltdown style? And, sometimes even if they're a teen or a tween, like we still can draw on what we saw when they were younger, to understand how the turmoil might look internally if they're not externalizing it as much anymore. So we can see like, there's this attitude coming from, or this, just sense of despondency or despair or angst or whatever. We can get a better feel for it if we know their early tantrum and meltdown styles. So another thing to look at, I guess, how can I regulate their moods better and my own moods alongside them is the question here, right? So my child seems to be often overwhelmed by their feelings. How can I help them regulate their moods better and regulate my own alongside them? This is a whole big topic that I spent 2 months and 3 days, a 3-day weekend on in my program for emotional mastery. But the short version is that you have to, consider it as a skill set. So even though like certain temperaments require more of these skills, it's still a skill set. So like, for example, I was told over and over again as a child that I was too sensitive. And I was sensitive. I would notice how other people are feeling. I felt really affected, especially if someone was angry, especially if they're angry at me. I hated being in trouble. I was quick to cry. I was quick to kind of get dramatic and catastrophize things like, oh, it'll always be this way. It'll never be this way, right? Kind of go to the worst case scenario. And I still have those tendencies because of my temperament, right? Like I'm a sensitive soul. And maybe that's your kid. And I remember that around, I would say 22, 21, I started to learn more that there was like an entire science behind regulating and co-regulating emotions and understanding them and navigating them. And it was like this whole world opened up to me. And then I went into the classroom and boy, did I have a chance to practice not only other people's emotions, these little kids, but also my own that were coming up from the stress, right? From like the steep learning curve of being with young children and having a sensitive nervous system. So quickly, like they'd be upset, I'd be upset, right? But I would have to try to hold it together. So what can we do to help regulate moods better? We learn it one skill at a time. But what I can tell you is that certain skills work better for certain people. So one of my favorite things to advise people to do and help them with is to go through and again, kind of an inventory, like go through all the different, main groups of coping tools, and then even expanding on that, to discover the best fit coping strategy for each family member. So here are a couple of things to avoid. Let me just lay this out as you're maybe considering, oh, I wonder what coping tools work for each of my family members. This is great. You have to also avoid these mistakes or these sort of pitfalls if it's going to work. First thing is you need to become trustworthy and they have to have a sense of psychological safety around you. So if you have a pattern, which I'm not saying you do, but if you have a pattern like some of my caregivers did of making something wrong about a strong feeling immediately, it's almost like I call it like picking a fight with a feeling. You don't ever want to pick a fight with a feeling because feelings are irrational. They really are standing on their own 2 feet. So like you can't really like dispute that. And they need the time and space that they need to be processed. So if we try to rush it or refute it or shut it down or deny it or fight it, the feeling will just dig in and get louder and bigger. Or even worse, it'll become something that is hidden, and now the trust and the trust between the parent and child is eroding, and then there's more and more space created between the parent and the child, right? And the caregiver and the youth. So how do we keep this close so that we can actually be helpful and teach them skills and learn skills too? We have to create a sense of psychological safety. So if somebody's starting to get upset, don't try to be right. Don't try to make them understand. Don't try to prove your point. Don't try to convince them. It's almost like, oh, pause on all that. Let's just deal with the feeling that came up. Right? And what's the opposite of picking a fight with a feeling? I think you can tell me if you're in the room. You find a way to listen to it and validate it. And here's the thing that trips most of us up. We don't like validating a feeling that we don't feel or that we think is outlandish or outsized for the situation. We don't like doing it. It feels disingenuous and it feels indulgent, and it is. So I'm not saying kid stubs their toe and they're wailing like the world is ending, that we agree with them that the world is ending. But what we could say is one thing about it that makes sense. Just one thing. Oh my gosh, you were walking along and out of nowhere you stubbed your toe. Facts? Yes, that happened. And now you're really upset that your toe hurts. Facts, right? And then maybe even part of you showing understanding, like, oh, I know when I'm surprised by a sudden pain, like it can be really upsetting to me too. I hear you, honey. Oh, okay. That's the opposite of picking a fight with a feeling, right? Now, how do we create some psychological safety and even provide some guidance from there? We will continue what's called emotion coaching. You can share something that works for you and give it a try, right? It's like sometimes it helps if you just shake it off, or if you rub it a little bit, or if you take a little break and distract yourself. Like let's look for the cutest leaf on the ground right now for a couple minutes, for a few moments until the throbbing stops. Like there's all these techniques, so many techniques. We can take deep breaths, we can do squeezes and releases. Like this is where the coping tools can just really shine. Then on the other side of it, you can revisit the thing that happened and help them kind of scale their perception, like that we call it the perception database. We can help them update so that they start to have a more right-sized response to what is happening. It's like, okay, so it looks like when you stub your toe, it's not the end of the day. It's not the world isn't crashing down. It's hard, but it doesn't last very long. It's temporary. Like you help them really understand. And while it's throbbing and the pain is lessening, we can distract ourselves. We can take a few deep breaths. We can get a hug. We can walk it off, whatever you ended up doing. It's like, oh, thank goodness that's how it is, right? It's like, thank goodness that's how this works. Phew. Oh gosh, I was wondering if you would never walk again, say something kind of outlandish and exaggerated, and you might even get a good laugh together. When you can go through that cycle, oh my gosh, moods become easier to regulate because you're building up this deep reserve of confidence that you can get through hard things, competence in terms of like having coping tools and strategies at your disposal, and also connection between the caregiver and the youth, because like you're a trustworthy guide. You're not going to make them feel even worse than they already feel. So I know I gave one example there. I have as many as there are scenarios, and I wish we had more people on lives on Zoom today, so you could shoot some at me, and I could role play with you a little bit of like, well, how you might help them and emotion coach them through. Good news, I have a script for you. If you'd like to have it, what you would need to do is go ahead and take my parenting strengths quiz. The link is in the description. It also gives you an opportunity to, walk through the 7 pillars of raising resilient kids, which is what my program's based off of. And also I've just found are just one of those things that really help you to find clarity in like, where am I at with my parenting? Like I think I'm doing well, but like there's these parts that are hard. Why is that? So put some kind of framework around that, and you can get kind of have a nice moment of reflection. I mean, who asks you, hey, so how do you think you're doing with, handling boundaries right now? Like, how do you think the routines are going? Like, that's what this quiz does. It's like having a nice check-in about your parenting. The other thing, that there's a place where you can say, yes, you're interested in having my emotion coaching cheat sheet. And then there's also, when you hit submit, the link to book a session with me. The session, by the way, is a complimentary 30-minute coaching session where we're actually talking live. Like I just did one this morning for a family where we're talking live. You're letting me know exactly how old are your kids and what are your challenges? What are your goals? How can I help you today? And we walk through those things. And then gives us a feel if it might be a fit for you to hop into one of my programs or for us to work together. So it's nice because I like helping people, and then you can get a feel for things, and we can have a more informed conversation about what might be next, whether it's working with me or just taking it forward from what you learned from the quiz and the session. So either way, we can set you up for more success going forward. So don't forget to do that. If you haven't yet taken the quiz, if you haven't yet booked a complimentary session with me, or if it's been at least 6 months, or especially if you're very interested in learning about this cohort of our Family Foundations Immersion program, our awesome year-long program that people seem to not get enough of. And our average retention is like folks stay in for 2.25 years, on average. Then definitely get on my calendar this week, because our cohort is closing soon, and we won't be opening another cohort for a while. So this is really, the time to get in on it while everything's in motion for the year. All right, last question. Let's not forget. We have a really good one this is from Kristen and Shirley. How do I bring my family together so we're actually on the same page? So the reason I know I wanted this one to be different, it's separate from Esther's question about handling differences in parenting styles between herself and her daughter's dad, is because the word family, it's like the whole family. So one more time, Kristen and Shirley would like to know, how do I bring my family together so we're actually on the same page? Pretty much everything I've talked about so far would contribute to that, but here's the rundown. You get on the same page with other caregivers about and your children about what the boundaries are and expectations are. You build really great, robust routines together. You have a process for conflicts and disciplinarian moments when you need to be able to lean on a tool set. You have a system in place for that. You build your resilience tools, and you learn about each other's and your own intrinsic motivators. You put all these things together, and you can get on the same page about just about anything. There will be sometimes unsolvable problems where you'll have to agree to disagree. And there are even sometimes that families need to be in, a new configuration, like for one household to become two. I'm not saying that this framework solves all problems, but what it does is it gives you a fighting chance to get on the same page and to be in that sort of more smoothly running, team feeling of collaborating together as a family. And what you get on the other side are things like family meetings, extra time in your routines to do fun things like read, play games, go on outings. You have less stress and more connection, and more like goodwill between family members. And you have trust and security, which means that as your children naturally grow up and get older and have lives outside of the home that are more peer focused, and later even more like career focused, et cetera, and their own families, you are still a trusted advisor, someone they can come to, that they know they can bring their hard things to, that you have the capacity and the wisdom to support them. And they have that deeper bond with you. That is like the most ideal outcome, right, for caregivers, is to be able to be there for their kids beyond just the child rearing years, but especially during. So that's what's on the other side of bringing everybody on the same page. One thing you could do, though, I would say right now, is just pick one thing to get on the same page about. It could be a routine. It could be about how we're going to handle a certain limit or boundary. It could be what does our repair process look like? It could be what are the next emotion coping tools and intrinsic motivation tools are we going to try next? This is what I do with families all the time. I'm just asking them, what's the next thing you want to focus on? What's the next thing you're going to try? And for especially families where there's multiple players, it's really helpful if everybody's working on something, and they're able to compare notes and see progress build over time. I don't run boot camps for a reason. I don't run short-term only asynchronistic courses. I only do longer engagements of, 6-month private coaching intensives or year-long programs. Occasionally I'll do something shorter with folks because there's a project we're trying to complete, like figuring out whether to stay in a school or not, something like that. But generally I'd go longer form, because what I don't want you to do is to get an idea, try it once, have it not work, and give up on what you ultimately wanted on the other end of that initial inspiration. Maybe it's better listening. Maybe it's more cooperation. Maybe it's smoother running routines. Maybe it's being on the same page. Maybe it's mood management, like all of these folks today on the ABA list had asked for. what I want you to do is stick with it, friends. So if that's with me, if that's with someone else, if you just need to like have me in your ear, listen to my 20 episodes of my podcast from the Calm Empowered Parent. That's the Calm Empowered Parent. Those are available. Or maybe it's your year to really go for it and have all these tools come into play in a way that's really transformative, which would be possibly joining my program if it's a fit. So there's a whole process of taking the quiz, getting on my calendar, us chatting, and a couple more steps after that to make sure that everything is looking good and smooth and exciting for the next year and aligned. And then you get to join the amazing families on the other side of that process to be in community with other folks who are working on these things as well. All right. Well, with that, we're going to close with we are calm, empowered parents raising confident, happy, and resilient kids. I'll say it one more time. And if you're listening, you can say it with me. We are calm, empowered parents. We are calm, empowered parents raising confident, happy, and resilient children. Raising confident, happy, resilient children. Yes, we are. Yes, you are. And it's been such a pleasure to answer these questions for you all today and support you. May your next days, years, and lifetime with your kids be connected, grounded, empowered, and built on that beautiful mutual respect, trust, and appreciation that is available and we can all cultivate. With that, I hope this has been uplifting for you and at least informative, and lots of love to each and every one of you. Till next time. Bye for now.